Okay, we are now 4 weeks into the Song of Songs. 4 weeks. So here's my question. How's it going? How's it going? So in order to test how we're doing, I wanted to just do a brief survey to help us kind of self-evaluate how this time is going for us. So what if I took a quick poll this morning and it went something like this? After 4 weeks in the Song of Songs, I feel sexually whole, sexually complete, sexually perfect. True or false? Just mark it down. After 4 weeks in the Song of Songs, I feel no sexual shame. I feel no sexual confusion. I feel no sexual pain. True or false? After 4 weeks in the Song of Songs, I feel that my marriage is flourishing. I deeply love my spouse. We're best friends and lovers. I feel deeply loved by my spouse, both emotionally and sexually. True or false? After 4 weeks in the Song of Songs, well, I now know I need to break off a bad relationship that I'm in, but I just can't do it. True or false? Or I see my unhealthy dating patterns, but I can't stop them. True or false? After 4 weeks in the Song of Songs, I wish my spouse loved me like that. True or false? After 4 weeks in the Song of Songs, I now realize that transcendent love can only help me and can only heal me. So where is it? Why is my experience of it so far from me? True or false? So how are you doing this morning? Well, here's the good news. This passage is for everyone who's disappointed with their survey results. Please stand for the hearing of God's word.
This is Song of Songs 2, 8 through 17. The voice of my beloved. Behold, he comes, leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks and says to me, Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. For behold, the winter is past. The rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth. The time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree ripens its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He grazes among the lilies, until the day breathes and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. This is the word of the Lord.
Please be seated. So, Lord, we ask that you would shine on the page. Would you fill us with your Spirit? Would you speak us back to life again? And we ask this in your name, amen. Okay, so what if I told you that the number one problem in all human relationships, the number one problem in your marriage, the number one problem in your parent-child relationship, the number one problem in your siblings' relationships, your number one problem in families and friends' relationships, the number one problem at work relationships, the number one problem in ministry relationships, the number one problem in leadership relationships, those leading, those being led, the number one problem in casual to stranger relationships, the number one problem in all human relationships is the starting point of the relationship. What's so crazy at this passage is actually giving us two possible starting points, two possible places to believe, to live, to think, to feel, to do relationships. Two possible starting points: spring and winter. And where you start will set the course of your relationship. The wrong starting point will wreck everything all up. So we begin. What's the starting point for all human relationships? For your marriage, for parents, for children, for siblings, in the workplace, in the gym, your neighbors, community groups, in the church. What's the starting place? And the answer from this text is winter. Winter, not spring. Verse 11, for behold, and I told you last week, behold in Hebrew can mean two things. It can mean pay attention or wow. Last week it was wow. Today it's pay attention. For pay attention, the winter is past. And you're thinking, wait, it's saying the winter is past. What are you talking about? What do you mean starting in the winter? Yes, winter is past. But notice winter comes first. In other words, this text is saying that the starting point of all relationships is winter until the spring comes. This means winter is here. It's here. All human relationships start in the winter. Your dating life starts in the winter. When you're considering a dating life, it's starting in the winter. It's starting in a relationally dead world. Your marriage starts with winter. You have two dying people in a dying relationship. All human relationships, from casual to the committed, start in the winter. You have freezing people, cold people struggling not to freeze to death. So don't miss this. If you're going to have a relationship in this world, if you're going to have a marriage, if you're going to have a parent-child relationship, if you're going to have any relationship in this world, it happens in the winter, not the spring. It happens with the wind blowing right through you. It happens with a ground so hard you can skate on it. It happens when things aren't growing. It happens when the temperature drops. It happens when you get hypothermia. It happens when you're frostbitten. Relationships happen in the winter, not the spring. And the question is why, and this is where some of us know the answer and we just need to be reminded, and other of us don't know the answer and we need to be told. And it's one thing to be told, and it's one thing to know and to experience it. And so when the Bible, as a unanimous decision from beginning to end, says, this is why there's winter. This is why there's winter in every relationship. This is why there is the frost. Because of sin. The Bible says sin is winter. Sin brings a winter power with it. Sin is the active absence of spring. Winter is here. Sean Norris, he's reflecting on winter, says, we are born into the winters. Listen to this. We are born into the winters of sickness, hatred, adultery, theft, fear, and war. Now, we could add, because we're talking about a relational context right now, we could say our relationships are born into the winters of loneliness. They're born into the winters of lust. They're born into the winters of lies and longing and lack of love and disunity and disloyalty and distrust. Separation and abandonment, emotional and physical adultery, all kinds of relational wreckage. Winter is here. So to make sure that we get that winter's here, this passage, what it ends up doing is it hits winter from a multiplicity of angles with a multiplicity of images. For instance, let's just start in verse 9. You have the angle of mountains and hills. These mountains and hills are insurmountable in relationships. These are mountains, problems, concerns, tensions, frustrations, debilitating criticisms, conflicts that are mountains, insurmountable, overwhelming, thundering big in relationships. And then you drop down to another image in verse 9 of this wall that blocks relationships, this wall that separates two people, this wall that divides two people, this wall that leads to alienation between two people, a barrier, a block. And then in verse 14, you get another image or another angle of the clefts of the rock that swallow up relationships. And so you have this picture of this rock. Now it's a cleft, it's a cave in a rock, a small one. So it's these clefts of rocks in relationships that swallow up relationships. But notice it's stone and it's rock hard. It's difficult to get into. It's almost like a rock grave. And then lastly, in verse 15, which is incredibly graphic and is probably more the norm than the others. It says foxes, but if you have a footnote in your Bible, it should say jackals, and I would actually put in hyenas. The hyenas that tear apart your relationships. And what hyenas do is they tear it apart. It's death by 1,000 cuts. It's just this daily slashing, daily bleeding out of relationships. My son on his wallpaper has this, my son in college has this huge male lion. And you've got this big, broad line of this picture of him. And then all around him are hyenas. And I said, where did you get that picture? And he sends me a YouTube video of BBC's Planet Earth. And I watched it the other day. And it's this picture of this. You got to watch it. Just Google it. This male lion. I mean, he's massive. He's the kind of lion that you're like, those are the kings of the jungle. And this thing is just massive, and he's young, so he's exploring his territory, and he wanders in to the land of hyenas. It's like Lion King. And there are 20 hyenas, over 20 surrounding him. And they are, you know that yell of the hyenas, they are like missiles darting in and out. They are nipping at him, taking chunks out of his hind side, going to his Achilles, trying to slit the tendons in his legs. Just constant movement. The lion is panicking. The lion's this majestic beast. You're watching it and you're screaming at it, kill those hyenas. I mean, I'm like, get those hyenas. And he'd get one and he'd tear it to pieces, but it cost him. Every time he focused on one and tore it to pieces, the backs of his legs were getting shredded. Finally, this majestic beast just sits down because he can't protect his hind side. And the goal of the hyenas is happening. They are actually wearing him out. And the king of the jungle is getting cut by 1,000 slices. Death by inches. And then you watch that show and you're like, how did they get these shots? But then the camera zooms on the other side of Timbuktu, of the prairie. And the lion's brother hears his roars. And he comes and scatters all the hyenas. And then I wish you could see how the lion, the brother that was almost dead, is rolling and rubbing up against his rescuer like you couldn't believe. And then they start rolling around playing. What an image. Winter is like a bunch of hyenas. Winter is like walls that divide. Winter is like clefts of rock that encase you in a tomb that you can't get out. Winter is insurmountable mountains and hills in your relationship. So what difference does it make for you to know that your relationships start here? What difference does it make in your life to know this? To know this in your marriage, to know this in your parenting, to know this with your brothers and sisters, to know this with your coaches and your teachers, and to know this with your teammates, to know this with anyone that you interact with, to know it with a stranger, to know it with any human being, to know it with any church person that you want to have friendship with. What do you think, what does it matter? What difference does it make? Here's the difference that it makes. Winter is the starting point of spring. The Franciscan priest Richard Rohr says it this way: reality is an ally of God. So if reality is an ally of God, winter's an ally of God. In other words, if you don't believe that your relationship is winter, if you don't think and feel and relate and do as if your relationships are winter, you're living in Disney World. Reality has the potential to propel you to God. Winter has the potential to propel you to God. Jesus says it this way: those who are well have no need of a physician, those who are sick, but those who are sick do. I came not to call the well, the righteous, but I came to call the sick, the sinners. Now, because we're talking about relationships, let's apply Jesus' words to relationships. It would go something like this: those relationships that are well have no need of a doctor. Those relationships that don't start in winter, that don't believe they're in winter, have no need for spring. In other words, Jesus is saying, listen, I bring spring to winter. I am the bringer of spring, and I bring it to winter relationships. If we don't start our relationships in winter, then we won't recognize the doctor. And we won't recognize the healing that he brings. If we don't believe and feel and think and relate and do and start with our relationships in winter, we will not recognize spring. Period. We'll never be propelled towards it. We have no concept what it's even like. We live in Disney World, a fantasy spring that doesn't exist. So how do you know if you're living in a fantasy spring that doesn't exist? How do you know if you don't start your relationships in winter? How would you know that? Like, okay, I'm not starting my relationships in winter. I'm actually starting and living my relationships in spring, an imaginary spring, Disneyland spring, or even you could eat off the trash cans. That's not real. You don't eat off trash cans. Trash cans are trash, but you go to Disney World, they're not trash. You can eat off of them. I don't know why I said that. Let's get back to how do you know if you're not starting in winter with your relationships. Here's how you know. You don't honestly and regularly admit that there's a winter within you. You don't honestly and regularly admit the chaos within, the coldness within, the hypothermia within, the frozen tundra within, the winter within. You don't admit it to God, you don't admit it to yourself, and you don't admit it to your relationships. Regularly. Honestly. If you don't, you live in spring. If you blame your parents for your unhealthy relationships, you live in spring. If you blame your husband for the lack of love in your marriage, you live in spring. If you blame your wife for lack of sexual intimacy in your marriage, you live in spring. If you believe things like, well, I can change my life and I can change this relationship, We can change this thing. You live in spring. If you believe things like, our marriage just needs some instruction on healthy relationships and then we'll be okay, you live in spring. If you feel things like, well, we're not like other relationships, we're special, we have true love, we're not like them, that could never happen to us, you live in spring. So how then do we, if this is the case, how do we practically start our relationships in winter? How do we start believing that relationships happen in winter? Our marriages, our parenting, our friendships, our church relationships, leadership relationships, casual relationships, committed relationships. How do you do that? How do you believe this, think this, feel this, live this, do this? How? Here's the answer. You're going to hate it. Listen to the law. I mean, really listen to the law. Not the way we listen to the law. I mean, really listen to the law. God has given us in the Song of Songs up to this point the perfect couple. We get to see perfect desire. We get to see perfect intimacy. We get to see perfect romantic love. We get to see the perfect marriage, the ideal, perfect relationship in spring, perfect sexual wholeness. Everything is perfect. And the question is, why did God give us this perfect picture, this perfect couple in the Song of Songs? Why did he do that? For the same reason, why did he give us these 10 perfect commands in Exodus? And why does he give us exhortations and imperatives in the New Testament? Why do we have law in the Bible? Here's the answer. To show us that the law of God has not made us better. Just because we hear about perfect desire has not made us better. Just because we see perfect intimacy, that has not made you better. Just because you look at what a perfect couple looks like doesn't make you a better couple. The purpose is to show you that the law can't make you better. The purpose is actually to show you the winter all around you. The winter within you and the winter in your relationships. The purpose of the law is actually to make you feel sick. So you need a doctor. So you get his health, his spring. Listen to the law. Listen to it. I mean, really listen to it. It's telling us over and over again, winter is here. Winter is here. And let the winter reality propel you to God. So let's talk then about how in the world then do you have relationships in winter? How does this happen? I mean, how can you have meaningful relationships in winter? We're not talking about perfect relationships because we know we can't. But how do you have meaningful ones? How can you have a meaningful marriage? How can you have meaningful parent-child relationships? How can you have meaningful friendships? How can you have meaningful work relationships? How can you have meaningful church relationships? How can you have meaningful ministry relationships? How can you have a meaningful church full of people in winter? The answer from the text is so simple. It's so simple that we overlook it, and it's so simple that you're going to hate it. It's so simple because if you want a list, it's going to drive you crazy. The answer is going to drive you crazy if you want a list. I'm going to tell you right now. If you want control in your relationship, the answer is going to drive you crazy. If you want a higher life relationships, if you want these higher life relationships, the answer is going to drive you crazy. If you want to be more spiritual, you want to be a super saint, and you want super saint relationships, the answer is going to drive you crazy. How do you have meaningful relationships in winter? The answer, the simple answer the text gives, by nothing but love. Nothing but love. Look at verse 8. The voice of my beloved. This literally, what she's saying is, the voice of the one I love. The voice of the one I love. Behold, he comes leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills, because nothing but love leaps over mountains. Nothing but love bounds over hills. Nothing but love moves into winter. Nothing but love. Verse 14, O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the crannies of the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. There's this woman named Kate Norris, and she struggled with the proposal she got. Sean, her husband now, proposed to her, and she struggled over it. Quote, I absolutely loved him and wanted to be with him, but in the back of my mind, I was very disappointed. Well, that's not the reaction I would want to get. Why was she so disappointed with Sean's proposal? Well, here's her answer. She gives it. She's very honest about it. She says, I struggle with anorexia ever since we met during high school. It was my secret life behind all the Christian leadership roles and academic achievements in my life. I had had a powerful recovery experience through the help of some wise experts. But at the time of the proposal, the time Sean proposes to me, I had gone back to the old friend, or enemy, I should say, to cope. And this is why she struggled. She says, Sean proposed to me in a period of real failing as a devout Christian who had been in therapy and had a supportive family. I wanted to be a lot more figured out by the time I got engaged. She goes on to say, I wanted to be engaged in strength, not weakness. I saw myself, and she quotes this passage, in the cleft of the rock, trying to hide all my flaws and my failures and my misery and my brokenness. I expected judgment in that cleft. I expected judgment and rejection. I even sought it out because that's been the voice in my head for so long. So she says, shouldn't he wait till I get better? But he didn't. And neither does this love. This love draws near to her in the clefts of the rock. This love is relentless in staying in her weakness. This love is so unexpected. No one expects this kind of love. No one. Nothing but love moves into the winter. Nothing but love moves into the winter. Nothing but love moves into the winter. So here's the application for all human relationships in winter. You want something to do? Here's what you can do. Nothing but love. Those of you that feel the winter winds in your marriage, the application for you is it only takes one person in the marriage, in a relationship, in a parent-child relationship, in a church relationship, in a work. It only takes one person to change the game. Who has the guts to be the one person? Because usually in marriage, it's two people waiting on the other person, and they wait the rest of their life. And we don't even, when we get outside marriage, I mean, with the kids, we do the same thing, but then you start getting out there, and it really, you just kind of go, well, oh well. This passage says nothing but love. If one person has the courage to love the other person, it changes everything. Look at verse 16. My beloved is mine. This is the result. My beloved is mine, and I am his. Now, modern folks cringe at this, but maybe we'll explore that meaning a little later, another time. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He grazes among the lilies. Lilies are code for her body. In other words, what's the point? She's been loved back to life again. Love has leaping power. Love has bounding power. Love has tearing down wall power. Love has going into the clefts of the rock power. Love has drawing near to weakness power. Love has relentless staying power. Love alone changes hearts. Love alone changes lives. You're like, Jeff, how do you change? How do you change? Nothing but love. How does your heart change? Nothing but love. Well, how do my kids' hearts change? Nothing but love. How does my spouse's heart change? Nothing but love. How does that person I can't stand at work change? Nothing but love. No, man, you got to give me like 5 how-tos and 200 steps. Nothing but love reaches and renews a life. Love brings in spring, period. If you're like me, when I got to this point, I'm like, well, where am I going to get the ability to be that one person to love like that? Here's the question. Can the one she loves really leap over mountains? Bound over hills? Break down walls? End winter? No, he can't. And as much as we like superheroes, we want and hope that someone can. But this is why I love hyperbole in the Bible. I mean, hyperbole in literature is one thing, but hyperbole in the Bible is a whole other world, because hyperbole in the Bible has an ultimate reality that actually says there is someone who does and who did. And he moves into your winter right now. He, right now, moves into winters. And what does he do when he gets there? He loves you. He calls out to you in love. He says, "Arise, my love, my beautiful one, for behold, the winter is past. I ended it. I am the spring you long for." Nothing but love. Nothing but love. Now you're able to be that one person to love. Spring has come.